He's worth talking to. He's got leaflets. I can give you one if you want.
On foreign wars rather than on domestic education, you know, free childcare, increasing the National Health Service. I mean, if this fella's so concerned about people's welfare,
content over everything,
then surely he should be advocating an expansion of welfare.
All right, is that what you think? What's about that? Do you agree with that? Have you an opinion on that? All right, have you an opinion on that?
Well, I do. It does sound good to only expand inside the country. But you know, the problem is that superpowers, and especially powerful countries, they need to assert their power somehow. They need to maintain it somehow. And you know, just like the Roman Empire was doing when it still existed, they would support the weaker barbarian tribe in the feuds between themselves. So at the border there would be disarray, and there wouldn't be one barbarian tribe that would get strong enough to attack them. That's kind of how power works. You know, it's not moral, but it's just how the world works. It's just how it always was working.
Then how do we explain the example of China, who doesn't engage in foreign wars?
Yeah, it does.
Like,
the Chinese are practically starting to own Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. They're coming to Africa and they're buying off at the African countries.
Okay, but that's not war. That's not imperialism. And
okay,
in terms of buying off them, I mean, the specificities of those deals are that the Africans maintain integrity of their own country. The Chinese are coming in, building particular pieces of infrastructure for mutual benefit. Now, to me, that's, you know, now this can be called soft power, certainly, but it definitely isn't the hard power that we're seeing in Syria and that we saw in Iraq, that we saw in Libya, in Ukraine. Absolutely, but I'm not denying that Russia's an imperialist country.
And I kind of empathise with that. According to my view of the cultural definition, let's say my culture was failing for some reason, a drought, because it can be anything that undermines it, or a natural disaster of other means. If a foreign power, let's not call them foreign power, if some foreign culture were to help us to get on our feet and re-establish that culture, that would be a good influence on the culture. If you want some definitions, that would be a good influence on the culture. But of course, you've got to know that this is where the power comes in. They could be coming in to undermine your culture or change it. You've got to know the difference. If you're weak, because like when you go in hospital, when you're weak, you don't argue with the surgeon, do you? If you're weak and someone says, "I'll help you out," you've got a problem. What do? Stay belligerent, or do I trust them to think that they'll help us and then leave us? And that's what you've got to decide. That's why I wouldn't be pulled. I'm not pointing to any one person. You won't get me to do that.
Why not?
Because I don't want to.
Huh?
Because I don't want to.
Why not? You can point at certain countries and you will always find out that the most powerful country is the most aggressive one.
No, I didn't say peoples. I said people.
Be what?
Individuals, people.
Sorry, you need to speak a bit louder.
Any group. Yeah, that may be so, yeah. I may need to speak a bit louder.
I would make the distinction between countries that have an imperialist foreign policy and an imperialist government, such as America, such as France, such as our own government, and countries that don't have, or have the opposite, an anti-imperialist foreign policy. Cuba, for example. The gentleman mentioned countries intervening to help in a genuinely altruistic manner. Cuba sent, you've perhaps heard of Operation Miracle. Cuba sent doctors around Latin America to carry out cataract operations to restore people's sight, free of charge. And it did this without really any benefit of its own. Or an example of mutually beneficial exchange, Venezuela sends oil to Cuba in exchange for Cuban doctors. This is mutually beneficial. Yeah. Even in the subject of, say, armed forces in the fight against apartheid in
Never
South
heard
Africa.
of Venezuela just sending out oil without any charge to Cuba. Never heard of that.
Oh, of course, but it's a trade.
I have heard a little bit about the doctors, but it's not a very big scale thing. It's relatively small scale.
Oh no. Between those two respective economies, the trade oil for doctors is very large. Venezuela needed healthcare expertise, which Cuba had. Cuba needed oil, which Venezuela had.
So wait, you're
able to
showing
provide.
Cuba and Venezuela as the good guys.
I'm showing Cuba and Venezuela as countries that have an anti-imperialist foreign policy and anti-imperialist governments. The same as China.
But it's funny that you say so.
I'd say
Because
that it depends on the culture.
In which
There might
case
be an
I'm sure you're
imperialist
familiar with the
culture.
economic war that's been
It's
waged
if
there
you're
for several years.
he's getting these, he's trying to work
Artificial
around
manufacture of
that.
shortages and so on.
but
And now,
look,
of course, more recently sanctions.
the big problem is that Cuba and Venezuela are very weak countries, and the people who live with them live very shitty lives. I met a Cuban guy the other day. He was a lawyer in Cuba. Here in the UK, he was a waiter. In Cuba, he told me that for a month, as a lawyer, he earned $200. In a month as a lawyer in Cuba.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
However,
I was
mate,
baffled.
You're not stupid. So you know that the purchasing power of $200 in Cuba is far greater than $200 in this country or in America. His quality of life over
Yeah,
there
but look,
is
there's
really
not as
quite
many
high.
goods to purchase with those $200.
Oh no, absolutely.
It's not a very developed country.
Oh no, I understand. But I'd care to point to this country where we have people working either for minimum wage or below minimum wage, and although these goods are available to purchase, they're simply not able to purchase them. In Cuba, you are able to purchase the goods because prices are controlled and are directly connected to the levels of wages.
But the
Why?
problem is
Because
there
people
are no,
just too
no
poor.
goods. Have you seen the stores in Cuba or in Venezuela?
Yes, they're
not
almost
empty.
No, they're not.
Can
They're
I
almost
intervene?
empty.
No.
They have they have a lot less products than in the Western.
Yeah, can I say
They
something
have
here? Because we're talking about quite interesting. I think if I could just make it a bit.
No, of course, make the contribution.
You're right to a certain extent. Again, I don't want to resent saying
To
that.
what extent? To what
yeah, but hang on.
extent?
If people internally in a because I'm talking from the cultural definition point of view, feel that those criteria are met of thriving, prosper, and general happiness. Someone else from another culture who measures it in iPhones released a week or whatever may not understand that because they've lost touch with that, or maybe it's irrelevant. I don't know. But if those people genuinely feel that, there is a problem here because you can convince people they're happy when they're not. And it's such a deep thing. This. But let's imagine that culture, but you were talking about Cuban, which was something.
Cuba, Venezuela, China,
Venezuela,
the countries with
I
an
don't know much about these
anti-imperialist
places,
foreign
but
policy.
China is not
if they had a culture where
I would
people
disagree.
genuinely felt that, then I'd say you can't knock it. According to my definition that I'm holding at the moment, because you've got other approaches.
What is your
which is what I
point?
like.
Cut to the chase, bro. Just say your point. What's your point?
Well, the point is, who do you to say that those people are not as happy as you?
Well, of course, everybody decides it. Everybody
no.
decides for themselves.
So I
That's
thought that
obvious.
yeah. So what was the discussion you was having?
You damn Finko, man.
Oh man, what's up, bro? Sorry, guys. Sorry.
You know this,
Sorry for the interruption.
No, hell no. Brotherly
Yeah,
love,
anyway.
man, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it comes down to the individual. Someone said, who was it who said about the culture is where everyone, what did he say? He didn't say it's made to. Is effectively suggested that they magically get on with each other in some way. But no, that's and I put to them. It's talking about brotherly. This, sister. This. Because gender doesn't come into it. As long as you act with good intention and believe with good intention and interact with best intention, then we'll all be all right. But it's when you get people that don't act with best intention and good intention, it goes wrong. You may have good intentions that he disagrees with. He may think your intentions are rubbish. But nevertheless, generally speaking, we're all human beings. And at the bottom line, we both want to stay alive, eat food, and not get shot.
All right, I'd agree with you. I'd want to supplement what you've said by saying that we can make it easier for people, as you say, to get along and to act with good intentions. I would say by
culture that supports that.
I would say by covering, rather than culture, I would say economic base. An economic base which absolutely. The economic base is what the culture is then built upon. That economic, so let's talk about the economic base just for a moment. I would have said that's free availability of healthcare. It's very difficult to act with good intentions if you're persistently sick, if your family members are persistently ill, persistently unwell, and at risk of dying at a moment's notice. If we've got free availability of education, because that facilitates a much smoother exchange of ideas. Culture isn't static, culture changes and morphs over time. British culture of 100 years ago is not British culture today. British culture of 100 years ago was not the same as British culture 400 years before that. Things change over time. So it's important that we build the economic base whereby people find it easier to break out of their own comfort zone
because they show their morals.
and get to learn their fellow man and fellow
Get
woman.
the freedom and liberty to break out your own comfort zone. Because if the higher the culture, the more efficient. Generally speaking, I guess. And therefore, you get more time for education, philosophy, more time to. Well, literally, you wouldn't be working as hard. You wouldn't be paying as much tax. But I like the idea of the free at the point of ability, free at the point of access of healthcare and such like. But whether it's done by government or whether it's done by insurance, it don't matter. But when people insist that it's done by country, it gets a bit difficult.
I think it does.
I find that one quite difficult.
An insurance company or any private company for that matter operates on the basis of profit.
Yeah, well, so does government.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
As long as these people are not being held to account.
Yes,
I know politicians' workers' wages. Why on earth
Can I say something?
£77,000 plus expenses.
Think about this.
When the average wage in this country is less than £30,000.
Can I make a
That is a disgrace. That's what breeds career politicians.
Absolutely, and that's what they try to not have. But let me put this way:
Something has to be run as a service. In order for something to be run, as you say, at its greatest efficiency, at its highest level of culture, it has to be run as a service. Now, whether that be education or healthcare or public transport or the basic or housing.
So how are we going to make them be held to account? I'm going to tell you how we can do it. Right? I've got this idea. Listen to it. By contract. Everything's done by contract, whether you like it or not. Unfortunately, I'm not governed by consent. I've never consented. Nothing written. All that kind of stuff. But nevertheless, sometimes it's better. Sometimes you put up with a bit of good or whatever. But this way, the problem is big government, and you can't trust them. The bigger they are, the greasier the poll, the bigger psychopaths. The chances are they'll get on. I don't mean they're all psychopaths, but certainly the psychopaths will win at the end of the day because they don't mind killing people and what have you. That's my expectation. That's what I expect. I don't know for sure. But now, how do we stop that? Well, basically, you have a contract in the first instance, a contract about what to do, an oath about you're going to do it, and then underneath the next bit, which is now always missing, is your consented consequence if you deviate or corrupt your position. Right? Now that is written by the person that is making contact with this other person and signed by them. So what will be written there is something like, and I will be in prison for life. So they sign it. Okay, now I can trust you with being an authority. Before I couldn't. Because you claim that you're going to be beneficial, you claim that you're going to fit by this oath. If you break that oath, we have the right to get you put in prison. You can't morally, and hopefully legally, not want to do that. I mean, what the old Magna Carta was this sort of thing, wasn't it? But that's missing. When you look at them, they never get a consequence. Whereas if you did it, dang, you'd be destroyed. And that's how it stopped. Nobody would take a big position.
That's actually not an unreasonable line of thinking. I would care to point out that in Iceland, after the financial crash, they jailed the bankers. We bailed them out. The Americans bailed them out. In Iceland, they sent the bastards to jail, and they did that without necessarily the hard and fast contract.
Whose fault was that? It's your fault. No, it's not. Because we didn't consent. Because the guys that represent us are there not by our consent. How can they be? Because we don't like that.
One such good idea. I mean,
they don't have a consequential consent.
Rather than there be a hard and fast contract of the type you're talking, I would have said that there already exists a contract between election promises and what is actually delivered by a government.
But they don't make promises. They make what are they called? Manifestos.
They make plenty of promises. A manifesto is a promise.
A
manifesto is a promise.
Well,
a political promise to an election. I think that's reasonable, right?
So, but they're never held to it.
Okay, so what we need exactly. So, bringing it back to Venezuela and other countries, there is such a thing as a recall referendum. So, halfway, if you've got a term of office of 4 years, 2 years in, there is a referendum between all of the electorate of that MP or that government or that councillor to, do we want to recall this person and have a fresh election, or do we think that they're doing their job sufficiently to finish their term?
Consistent with the contract to compete with.
Absolutely right.
Did they have one?
This happens in Venezuela. Corrupt politicians in Venezuela get pulled back on this basis.
Oh, right,
and it's totally unknown about in this part of the world.
No, I've heard lots of stories about Venezuela going back years and years and years, and it don't seem to match what I hear in the media. But having said that, that's about as far as it goes. I don't know much more. You listen to other mechanisms. I guess in this country we're told it's so good and so wonderful, like they all are. And we guess to believe that. I'm not condemning this culture. What I'm saying is that we need a means. It's as I was talking about with culture. It's the principle. You need a contract that has a consequence. What would happen? People wouldn't take my office because I know they'd be lining themselves up ultimately for certain death. Take it. Nobody would take it.
The only people who would take it are those people who genuinely want to work for the betterment
and they will be supported. When they demonstrate it, they'll be supported by the people. Very successful.
Absolutely right.
But this is an ideal. It never worked, could it?
Tell me, when did you last have a demonstration in this country in support of the government? It was around about 1948, the creation of the National Health Service. In Venezuela last week, and I know I keep coming back to this, but it's a very important country at the present time. There was 1 million people on the streets of Caracas in support of the government there, despite all of the nonsense that were being told of Guaido and the opposition and Trump and the US. It's worlds apart. But the key difference is they have a government which is legalistically and directly linked to the people and recallable at halfway through a given term. We don't.
One could argue that whole thing is absolute cancer to some societies where the last thing they want is that.
No. How can first past the post in this country be considered a democratic system? This opens the door for the case, correctly I would argue, for proportional representation, where politicians, irrespective of creed and colour, actually have to work together for their constituents and for the wider nation.
Great. And if any of them break their contract, then we...
Absolutely, we lock them up. Okay, we lock them up.
Lock up if it's that bad.
Exactly. Stick attachments.
Remember, they have consented to it.
Stick attachments to earnings and things like that. You know, you screwed us, fine. We're going to screw you for the next 30 years.
There's a problem though. Let's imagine it's in our fantasies that they got so powerful that they would never allow that to happen.
So we're now talking about holding power to account.
Look, we're all different. I don't know why they've got this fancy idea they're all the same. They're totally different. Thank goodness we're different. Otherwise, we'd never have
be terribly boring.
It's totally boring, but probably wouldn't last more than a week, wouldn't we? You know.
There are undeniable similarities. I mean, we all drink the same water, we all breathe the same air, we all walk on the same ground, we all use the same buses, we all go to the same schools, apart from a tiny sliver of people who don't. And it's from that tiny sliver, you call them psychopaths, I'd call them the ruling class, that emanate the problems of society.
Bear in mind, they're psychopaths. I'm not going to call them psychopaths. I've never called a psychopath a psychopath.
You don't know if you've met one.
If there are barriers to
I certainly haven't.
then they should respect those barriers.
You don't know. No, you don't know. You don't know.
No, very true.
So they say. So they say. I mean,
Well, that's right.
that's how they say. Let's imagine that all that nonsense was just invented in 1860 by what's his name, and actually there was no such thing as just putting our minds as being a thing that we can. Everyone is paranoid to a certain extent. You have to be, otherwise you accept anything. So all you have to do is sow a bit of paranoid in mind to militarise their paranoia, and you own them. And what if? They told us a story about this psychopath. And also, once you've got that idea, all I have to do is tell you to be down the road there. By the way, can you bring your lunch in a big bag? Get some guys out and shoot you dead and say we got him. I'm not the terrorist down there. We've got him on film.
I'm not sure we can equalise paranoia with cynicism.
Not generally, no.
I would have said it was one's cynicism, one's experience of life, you know, something that you can't teach, you have to really, well, you can teach it, but you have to learn it for yourself.
It's hell, you can't teach.
Absolutely, where you have to learn it for yourself. I would have said that paranoia is a qualitative step beyond cynicism. Paranoia is that, as far as I understand it, is somebody is out to get you. That's paranoia. Somebody is out to directly work against your interests. Cynicism is Jesus is going to pop up tomorrow, yeah.
Do you believe there's any group or any person that is acting against your... do you believe there's any people or organisations with acting with bad intentions?
Absolutely.
So you've got that paranoia?
Absolutely, the ruling class.
That's right.
But would I call that paranoia? Paranoia also is unsupported. It's generally without evidence.
No, that's what paranoia is.
If paranoia is backed up by observation, by scientific testing,
is it? I guess, is it?
I would have said so. I would have called it a legitimate suspicions.
Yeah. That's right. And that's why I talk about prejudice. Prejudice, again, it's been militarised. Again, socially militarised. I mean, prejudice is a good thing to judge. Like the paranoia, you think, well, they go together, don't they? But once you prove something happened, like just conspiracy theory. Well, as they say, once a conspiracy theory is a conspiracy fact, it's too damn late. Of course we, you know, another one I'll give you to think about. If you ever believe that 2 or more people have ever contrived in secret to commit a crime, then you're a conspiracy theorist. Of course everyone believes that. If the police didn't work on that basis, they could never actually solve any crimes. They come up with evidence and then they have loads of theories about how this conspiracy happened. Conspiracy theory is not a scary word, but it's been militarised, it's been hijacked. And sure enough, it's usually different concepts. But I find that fascinating. Our expressions have been hijacked and plonked into us. So if we didn't have these conversations, we might never be aware. Do you reckon about what she said?
I followed you, yes.
I got the feeling.
Listen, I'm going to take a wander around, see what other characters are on the map, all right?
So we get now someone else to talk about.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, good. See that.
Nice meeting you, man. My name's Daoud Hamdan.
Come take over everything from your belly. Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen.
Before. It was corrupt before, so why does God say in the Quran that you should believe in it? It was corrupt before.
Well, you should believe in its existence. You should believe in it.
Is that what he says? You just believe in it. You know, what God should say is don't believe in it. Why would Allah say believe in a book that was corrupt?
Because
he actually said you should ask the Christians, you should ask the people of the book.
Okay, some people say that, I had friends a long time ago, they believe